What happens when an upscale restaurant owner cruelly turns away a homeless veteran on a freezing winter night, without realizing that Morgan Freeman is witnessing everything from his quiet corner table? What began as a heartbreaking moment of injustice transformed into an encounter that would change multiple lives forever. By the time the evening ended, no one would forget Morgan's powerful words or the incredible opportunity that brought everyone to tears. Before we begin, let us know where you're watching from in the comments. The Astor, nestled on a tree-lined avenue in Manhattan's Upper East Side, prided itself on being one of New York's most exclusive dining establishments. With its mahogany paneling, crystal chandeliers, and wine list that ran to 32 pages, the Astor wasn't just a restaurant, it was a statement, a fortress of luxury that separated the privileged from the ordinary. On this particular December evening, snow fell in thick, silent curtains outside the restaurant's windows. Inside, the gentle murmur of conversation mingled with the soft notes of a jazz pianist, creating the meticulously crafted atmosphere that had earned the Astor its Michelin star and its reputation as a sanctuary for the city's elite. In the far corner, partially hidden by an ornate column, sat Morgan Freeman. At 87, the legendary actor had chosen the Astor for a quiet dinner alone before heading to his hotel after a day of interviews promoting his latest documentary series. Dressed in a simple but elegant charcoal suit, he had requested a private table away from the main dining area, not out of arrogance but from a lifelong desire for moments of peace amid his public life. The maitre d', Philippe Laurent, had nearly fainted when Morgan made his reservation. Such was the protocol at the Astor that even Morgan Freeman's name required verification. But once confirmed, the staff had scrambled to prepare the perfect corner table. Morgan had been gracious, requesting only a glass of bourbon and simple meal, thanking each server with genuine warmth that made them momentarily forget they were serving a Hollywood legend. As Morgan savored his meal and observed the restaurant's patrons, the front doors of the Astor opened, allowing a momentary gust of winter air to disturb the carefully maintained warmth. Through the frosted glass doors came a man whose appearance immediately drew uncomfortable stares from the nearest diners. James Wilson, 68 years old, was bundled in layers of mismatched clothing, his weather-beaten face partially hidden beneath a worn beanie pulled low over his ears. His grey beard was neatly trimmed despite his circumstances, and he carried himself with a dignity that seemed at odds with his threadbare appearance. Most notable was the faded veteran's service pin affixed carefully to his outer jacket, small enough to be missed by casual observers, but prominently displayed as if it were made of precious metal. James approached the host stand where Philippe stood guard like a sentinel protecting a castle. The restaurant had fallen noticeably quieter, the background conversations dimming as patrons pretended not to stare at the uninvited guest who had wandered into their exclusive domain. "Excuse me," James said, his voice steady despite the visible trembling of his chapped hands. "I know this is unusual, but the temperature's dropped below freezing and the shelters are all full tonight. I've been turned away from 3 already. I'm a veteran, served 2 tours in Afghanistan. I don't want a handout. I have $10. I was hoping I could just sit somewhere warm, maybe have some soup or coffee until the storm passes." Philippe's expression remained professionally blank, but his posture stiffened. Alexander Reed, the Astor's owner and executive chef, had emerged from the kitchen upon noticing the disturbance, his tailored white chef's coat immaculate, his expression darkening as he assessed the situation. "I'm sorry, sir," Philippe replied, not sounding sorry at all, "but the Astor is a fine dining establishment with a strict reservation policy. We're fully booked this evening." Morgan Freeman, from his corner vantage point, had a clear view of the encounter. He set down his fork, his attention now fully focused on the scene unfolding at the entrance. James glanced around the restaurant, noticing several empty tables. "I understand. I don't need a table. Maybe just a spot at the bar. I served my country for 8 years. I'm just asking for a warm place for an hour or two." Alexander Reed stepped forward, placing himself between James and the dining room. At 45, Reed had built the Astor through ruthless ambition and an unwavering commitment to exclusivity. The son of wealthy real estate developers, he had never known hardship himself, but had cultivated an image as a self-made culinary genius. "Sir," Reed said, his voice carrying just enough to be heard by the nearest tables, "the Astor isn't a shelter. Our bar seating is reserved for proper dining customers. I'm going to have to ask you to leave before we're forced to call security." James's shoulders slumped slightly, but he maintained his dignity. "I understand. I apologize for the intrusion." As James turned to leave, returning to the bitter cold outside, a voice resonated through the now silent restaurant. "Excuse me." The three simple words, spoken in that unmistakable deep timbre, caused every head to turn. Morgan Freeman had risen from his table and was now walking toward the entrance, his tall frame straight, his pace unhurried but purposeful. Alexander Reed's expression transformed instantly from dismissive to fawning. "Mr. Freeman, I had no idea you were dining with us this evening. Is everything to your satisfaction? Would you prefer a more central table?" Morgan didn't acknowledge Reed, instead extending his hand toward James. "Sir, I couldn't help overhearing. My name is Morgan Freeman." James looked momentarily startled before taking the offered hand. "James Wilson, sir. It's an honor to meet you." "The honor is mine," Morgan replied, his voice carrying a warmth that stood in stark contrast to Reed's cold dismissal. "I was wondering if you might join me for dinner? My table is rather large for one person, and I'd welcome the company." The restaurant had gone completely silent. Alexander Reed's face cycled through shock, embarrassment, and calculation as he tried to process what was happening. "Mr. Freeman," Reed interjected smoothly, "while we'd be happy to accommodate any guest of yours, perhaps we could arrange a more suitable circumstance. We could have something prepared for this gentleman to take with him, on the house, of course." Morgan's expression remained pleasant, but something in his eyes caused Reed to take an instinctive step backward. "I'm not looking for a compromise, Mr. Reed," Morgan said, his voice still gentle but now carrying an undercurrent of steel. "I'm extending an invitation to a fellow diner to join me at my table, unless there's a policy at the Astor that prevents guests from dining together." Reed sputtered. "No, of course not, but—" "Excellent," Morgan said, effectively ending the conversation. He turned back to James. "That is, if you'd like to join me, Mr. Wilson. I'd be grateful for the company." James looked between Morgan and the visibly uncomfortable restaurant owner. "I wouldn't want to impose." "Not at all," Morgan assured him. "In fact, I insist." With that, Morgan Freeman, one of the most recognized and respected actors in the world, guided the homeless veteran through the Astor's dining room toward his corner table. The other patrons watched in stunned silence, some whispering behind their hands, others discreetly reaching for their phones to capture the unexpected scene. As they reached Morgan's table, a flustered server rushed to add a place setting. Morgan thanked him kindly, then pulled out a chair for James. "Please," Morgan said, gesturing to the seat, "make yourself comfortable." James carefully removed his outer layers, revealing more of the veteran's pins on his inner clothing. As he sat down, Morgan returned to his own seat and signaled for the server. "We'll need another menu, please," Morgan requested, "and perhaps you could bring my friend a hot coffee to start." "Right away, Mr. Freeman," the server replied, rushing to comply. Across the restaurant, Alexander Reed had retreated to the kitchen, his face flushed with embarrassment and barely contained anger. The maitre d' followed him, closing the door behind them. "Do you have any idea how this looks?" Reed hissed once they were out of earshot of the dining room. "A homeless man at the Astor? This could ruin our reputation." Philippe frowned. "But Mr. Freeman is perhaps our most prestigious guest in months. We can hardly refuse him." Reed paced the kitchen, ignoring the curious stares of his staff. Morgan Freeman or not, I've spent years building the Astor's image. I won't have it compromised by some vagrant looking for handouts. Back in the dining room, Morgan and James had begun to talk, their conversation flowing with surprising ease. The initial awkwardness had quickly faded as they discovered unexpected common ground. Mississippi, James said, surprised. I was stationed at Keesler Air Force Base in Biloxi for training before my first deployment. Morgan nodded, smiling at the connection. Clarksdale born and raised, though I left as a young man. Still, Mississippi stays with you, doesn't it? It does, James agreed. Those Gulf Coast sunsets are something I've never forgotten. The server returned with coffee for James and a menu. May I take your order, sir? He asked, managing to maintain his professional demeanor despite the unusual circumstances. James hesitated, glancing at the menu prices that exceeded his entire weekly budget when he was lucky enough to find odd jobs. Order whatever appeals to you, Morgan encouraged. I recommend the ribeye, it's excellent. James carefully set his menu down. If it wouldn't be an imposition, the soup of the day would be more than enough. Morgan studied James thoughtfully before addressing the server. We'll both have the ribeye, medium rare, with all the accompaniments, and perhaps a glass of that Cabernet for my friend if he'd like. James began to protest, but Morgan gently raised a hand. Please, allow me this pleasure. It's rare I find such agreeable dinner company in New York. As they waited for their meals, Morgan asked the question that had been on his mind since the moment he witnessed James's rejection at the door. If you don't mind my asking, what happened? How does a veteran find himself without shelter on a night like this? James looked down at his coffee, his weathered hands wrapped around the warm cup. For a moment, Morgan thought he might have overstepped. It's a common enough story, James finally said. I served as a combat photographer in Afghanistan. 2 tours. Saw things through my lens that most people can't imagine. He paused, taking a sip of coffee. Came home with medals and PTSD that wouldn't let me sleep without seeing those images again. Morgan listened silently, giving James the space to continue at his own pace. The VA tried their best, I suppose. Medication helped somewhat, but I couldn't hold down regular work. Couldn't stand being in crowded places or handle sudden noises. My wife stuck by me for years, but eventually, James trailed off. Can't blame her, really. Living with someone who jumps at shadows isn't easy. And your photography? Morgan asked gently. A flicker of light returned to James's eyes. I still have my camera, Nikon D500. It's the one thing I've never pawned or sold, even on the worst days. I keep it safe at a storage locker I manage to pay for each month. Sometimes I still shoot. City scenes mostly, when I can afford the memory cards. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of their meals. The ribeye steaks were perfectly prepared, accompanied by truffle mashed potatoes and seasonal vegetables. The server poured a glass of wine for James, with the same deference he would show any valued patron. This is the first proper meal I've had in months, James admitted after taking his first bite. I can't thank you enough, Mr. Freeman. Morgan, please, he corrected. And you don't need to thank me. I'm enjoying the company. As they ate, Morgan continued to draw out James's story. The veteran had been homeless for nearly 3 years, moving between shelters when available, sleeping in parks or subway stations when not. Despite his circumstances, he had maintained connections with other veterans, often sharing information about resources or looking out for one another. The hardest part isn't the cold or the hunger, James confided. It's the invisibility. People look through you, past you, anywhere but at you. After a while, you start to wonder if you really exist at all. Morgan nodded thoughtfully. I've played roles where I portrayed homeless individuals, but I've always known the fundamental dishonesty of that. At the end of the day, I could wash off the makeup and return to comfort. The real experience, the psychological weight of being unseen, That's something no actor can truly capture. Their conversation deepened as the meal progressed, touching on everything from favorite books to their shared love of jazz. James revealed himself to be remarkably well-informed and articulate, defying the stereotypes many held about those experiencing homelessness. "You mentioned you were a combat photographer," Morgan said as they finished their main course. "I've always had tremendous respect for war photographers. It takes a special kind of courage to go into danger armed only with a camera." James nodded, a shadow passing over his face. "My job was to document the reality of the war. Not the sanitized version for news broadcasts, but the actual conditions, equipment states, tactical situations. Sometimes that meant photographing things no one should have to see, let alone preserve on film." "Do you have any of your work?" Morgan asked. James shook his head. "The military owns most of my official photographs. I have some personal ones saved on hard drives in my storage locker, but I haven't looked at them in years. Some memories are better left packed away." As they were speaking, Alexander Reed emerged from the kitchen, having composed himself. He approached their table with a forced smile. "Mr. Freeman, I hope everything has been to your satisfaction this evening," Reed said, pointedly ignoring James. "The food was excellent," Morgan replied, "though I find the hospitality somewhat selective." Reed's smile faltered slightly. "I want to personally apologize for any misunderstanding earlier. Had I known your guest was a friend of yours—" "That's precisely the problem, isn't it?" Morgan interrupted, his voice still pleasant, but with an edge that caused Reed to stop mid-sentence. "The quality of a person's character shouldn't depend on who they know or what's in their wallet." Reed shifted uncomfortably. "Of course, but as a business we have certain standards." "Standards," Morgan repeated, the single word somehow carrying the weight of judgment. "Tell me, Mr. Reed, have you ever served in the military?" Reed blinked at the unexpected question. "No, I haven't had the pleasure." "It's not a pleasure," Morgan corrected quietly. "It's a sacrifice. One that Mr. Wilson here made for 8 years of his life." He gestured toward James. "While some of us were building restaurants or making movies, he was documenting war zones, creating a visual record of American military history at great personal cost." The restaurant had gone silent again, surrounding tables abandoning all pretense of not listening to the conversation. "I appreciate your position," Reed said, his voice strained. "But surely you understand that the Astor can't be expected to show basic human dignity?" Morgan finished for him. "To recognize that sometimes circumstances beyond our control can change our lives irrevocably? To understand that the same veterans we claim to honor with bumper stickers and social media posts deserve actual respect when they stand before us?" Reed had no response. Behind him, several patrons were watching intently, some with expressions of discomfort, others with growing awareness. Morgan's voice softened. "The measure of a society isn't how it treats its most privileged members, Mr. Reed. It's how it treats those who need compassion the most." With that, Morgan turned back to James, effectively dismissing the restaurant owner, who retreated after a few awkward moments. "I apologize for that," Morgan said to James. "I didn't mean to speak for you or make you uncomfortable." James shook his head. "No apology needed. It's been a long time since anyone stood up for me like that." As they finished their meal with coffee and dessert, Morgan made a decision. He had come to the Astor seeking a quiet dinner alone, but something told him this encounter was not coincidence, but opportunity. "James," Morgan said after a thoughtful pause, "I'm currently producing a documentary series on American resilience, stories of people who faced extraordinary challenges, yet maintained their dignity and humanity. One segment focuses on veterans' experiences after service." James listened, curious but not yet understanding where Morgan was going. "Your background as a combat photographer gives you a unique perspective. someone who documented war professionally and now experiences the aftermath personally. Would you be interested in consulting on the project? We need people who can speak to the reality, not just the talking points. James looked stunned. Are you offering me a job? I'm offering you an opportunity, Morgan clarified. It would be paid work, of course, and we could arrange temporary housing while you're working with us. The production offices are here in New York. James set his coffee cup down carefully, his hands trembling slightly. Mr. Freeman, Morgan, I don't know what to say. Why would you do this for a stranger? Morgan considered the question seriously. Perhaps because I've lived long enough to recognize that the line between success and struggle is thinner than most people realize. Perhaps because I believe your story and perspective matter. Or perhaps simply because I can, and there's not enough of that in the world. People doing what they can, when they can, for those who need it. By the time Morgan Freeman and James Wilson left the Astor that night, something fundamental had changed. It wasn't just the promise of work or temporary housing for James, though that was significant. It was the restoration of something more valuable than money: visibility. Morgan had seen him, truly seen him, when others had trained themselves to look away. As they stood outside the restaurant, the snow still falling gently around them, Morgan's driver pulled up in a black SUV. My team will contact you tomorrow to arrange everything, Morgan said, handing James a card with his production company's information. In the meantime, I've arranged a hotel room for you tonight. James clutched the card carefully. I don't know how to thank you. Morgan smiled, placing a hand on James's shoulder. You already have, by sharing your story and reminding me why the work I do matters. Stories have power, James. Yours deserves to be told. 3 months later, James Wilson sat in a production studio, reviewing footage of interviews he had conducted with fellow veterans for Morgan Freeman's documentary series. His expertise as a photographer had proven invaluable, his eye for composition and story helping to shape the visual narrative of the series. The temporary consulting position had evolved into a permanent role with Morgan's production company. James now lived in a small but comfortable apartment, paid for with his own salary. He had reconnected with VA services and was receiving proper treatment for his PTSD. More importantly, he had reconnected with his daughter, who had been searching for him since his disappearance into homelessness 3 years earlier. The documentary series, titled Invisible America, premiered to critical acclaim, with the episode featuring veterans' experiences, including portions of James's own story, generating particular attention. It sparked a national conversation about the treatment of veterans and the invisible struggles many face after returning from service. As for the Astor, the restaurant experienced its own transformation. The night after Morgan and James's dinner, a scathing social media post went viral, written by a diner who had witnessed the entire exchange. Public backlash was swift and severe. Faced with a PR crisis and declining reservations, Alexander Reed was forced to reconsider his approach. In an unexpected move, Reed reached out to James and Morgan, offering a public apology and proposing a monthly dinner program where the Astor would serve homeless veterans. Skeptical of Reed's sincerity but unwilling to dismiss the potential benefit to veterans, James helped establish the program, which eventually expanded to include job training in the restaurant industry. On the 1-year anniversary of their chance encounter, Morgan and James returned to the Astor, this time to attend one of the veterans' dinners. The restaurant's atmosphere had changed, still elegant, but now more welcoming. At each table sat current or former service members, enjoying the same quality dining experience as any other patron. Alexander Reed approached their table, his demeanor markedly different from their first meeting. Mr. Wilson, Mr. Freeman. He greeted them with genuine respect. Thank you for coming tonight. James nodded acknowledgement. The program seems to be going well. It's been transformative, Reed admitted. not just for the veterans we serve, but for me personally. I've learned more in this past year than in all my previous years in this business. Morgan smiled slightly. The most important education often comes from unexpected sources. As the evening progressed, James shared with Morgan some news. He had received a gallery offer to exhibit his photography, both his war documentation and a new series capturing the unseen lives of homeless veterans in New York. The exhibition would raise funds for veterans' housing initiatives. "None of this would have happened if you hadn't seen me that night," James said quietly. "Not just seen me, but really looked when everyone else was turning away." Morgan considered this. Perhaps the real tragedy isn't that people fall through the cracks in our society. It's that we've designed a society with so many cracks to fall through, then trained ourselves not to notice. The documentary series, Invisible America, went on to win multiple awards and inspire community initiatives across the country. James Wilson's photography exhibition toured nationally, bringing attention to veterans' issues through his unique dual perspective as both documenter and participant. And the story of that snowy night at the Astor, when one of Hollywood's most respected actors refused to look away, became a powerful reminder that sometimes the most important act of humanity is simply to see another person completely, to recognize their inherent dignity, regardless of their circumstances. As Morgan had put it in the documentary's opening narration, the first act of compassion is attention. Before we can help, before we can heal, before we can change anything, we must first be willing to see. If you found this story inspiring, please like and subscribe to our channel for more videos about celebrities using their fame and influence for good. Share in the comments if you've ever experienced or witnessed an act of kindness that changed someone's life. We'd love to hear your stories.